And so when this election is posed as a choice, then I think people, sort of a light bulb goes on. Oh, yeah, now I remember. That didn't work. And that then gives us an opportunity to say what we've been doing isn't enough. We're only halfway there, but what we're doing is starting to work. And we've got to stay on that path. You know, and for a lot of people here, depending on who you're talking to, you know, you should tailor a message to speak to those persons' concerns. If the young people who are here, if you're talking to a classmate, it's not that hard to say, what's your student loan debt going to be when you graduate? And they've probably calculated, boy, I'm going to owe $50,000, $60,000, $70,000, $100,000. And you say to them, you know what? The president passed a tax credit for young people that'll be worth $10,000 for anybody going to 4 years of college. And that could be repealed if Republicans take over. They've already proposed to cut education spending by 20%. Well, that'll get people's attention because that's a pocketbook issue. That's a bread and butter issue. If you're talking to a senior and you say, I know you've heard a lot of nonsense about the health reform bill, but do you know that the trustees of Medicare said that as a consequence of our reforms, we extended the life of Medicare. And by the way, if you're in that zone called the donut hole where you're having trouble paying for your prescription drugs, you're going to be receiving a $250 check to help pay for those prescription drugs. And over time, by next year, we're going to cut your cost for prescription drugs in half, according to the reform law. So you want to speak to people in terms of what it is that they're going through right now in their lives. And you know, I think that across the board, if they see what the choice is, you know, then I think that we'll do very well.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're going to, before we open it up to the crowd here, we're going to take one more from folks online. And this one comes from Twitter. This is from Maureen in New Jersey. You also see it up on the screen here. Mm-hmm. And Maureen asks, can we inform people that the campaign slogan was, yes, we can, not yes, we can in 21 months? It took 8 years to get us into this mess.
Well, you know, that's sort of a softball. But I appreciate it, Maureen. Look, people have good reason to feel frustrated. You know, if you're having trouble making your mortgage right now, and you've seen your home value go down by $100,000, or you've seen your 401k drop in value by 20%, and you're about to retire, if you have had to put off your college education because your family can't quite afford to help you out now, and you're having trouble, you know, that's tough. And so I don't blame the American people for feeling frustrated and impatient. But I do think it is important to make sure that we're communicating that the problems that we have are problems that can be solved, but they're not going to be solved overnight. And what we want to make sure of is that we're on the right path. You know, so let's take the example of American manufacturing. I mean, we've seen manufacturing leave our shores for years now. Plants closed all across this country. Some of it has to do with them just shifting to places like China that had lower labor costs. Some of it had to do with automation. And so those are a lot of well-paying jobs that help to build our middle class that over the last 20, 30 years have been gutted. Now, I think the American worker is the most productive worker on earth. I think we have the most creative and dynamic entrepreneurial culture on earth. We still have more innovation than any country on earth. but we haven't harnessed it. And especially we're not harnessing it for the jobs of the future. So when you look at clean energy, for example, when we came into office, we were producing 2% of the world's advanced batteries that go into electric cars and hybrid cars. Now you think about it, this is where the industry is going. We were making all our money, to the extent that any of our automakers were making money, making them on SUVs. So what we said was, let's jumpstart an American advanced battery industry. And we have seen advanced battery plants open throughout the Midwest, and we're on pace now to have 40% of the market by 2015, in 5 years' time. Now, that's just one example of how we can rebuild American manufacturing using innovation, using research, using the skills and talents of our workforce. But we're not going to completely replace all the jobs that were lost in manufacturing in 2 years' time or 3 years' time. What we have to do is nurture and build on these successes in solar panels and wind turbines and electric cars. Over time, we're creating a whole new industry that can absorb skilled workers. And then if we're training those workers effectively for those jobs, then as those industries grow, opportunities for Americans grow. And that's always been how this middle class has been built here in this country. So I guess my main response to Maureen is, on the one hand, I think you got to be sympathetic to the fact that people need help now. And we're doing everything we can to make sure that job growth is here now, that we're helping small businesses get loans right now so they can keep their doors open or they can expand. We're making sure that teachers aren't getting laid off as much as we can by providing help to the states and local governments that are hard-strapped. There are a lot of things that we're doing right now, but those big structural changes that a lot of folks are worried about, those can be solved, but it's going to require persistent effort. It's going to require imagination and stick-to-itness over the course of several years in order for us to get back to where we were. I'm confident we'll get there, but we've got to make sure that we don't start going back to the policies that resulted in American manufacturing decline. And I'm confident we can do that.
Thank you. Now what we'd like to do is just open it up to you to take questions from the audience.
All right, let's see who we got. This young man right here, he's all ready. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Daniel Lippman from Massachusetts, and I thank you for coming to GW.
Thank you.
And my question is, what are some of the surprises that you've encountered in Washington, and what lessons have you learned in your 21 months here? Thank you.
Well, where do I start? No, let me tell you something. On the one hand, I've been surprised by how the news cycle here in Washington is focused on what happens this minute as opposed to what needs to happen over the course of months, years. Yeah, the 24-hour news cycle is just so lightning fast. And the attention span, I think, is so short that sometimes it's difficult to keep everybody focused on the long term. The things that are really going to matter in terms of America's success 20 years from now, when we look back, are not the things that are being talked about on television on any given day, or appear on the internet, on a blog on any given day. And so that's challenging. And I've got to constantly figure out how to work with this new media environment to make sure that we stay focused on what's important. Are we educating our kids over the long term? Are we putting enough money into research and development? Are we helping grow startup businesses and small businesses that are going to create the jobs of the future? Are we, competitive in terms of how we deal with our export sector? Those big questions, a lot of times they're kind of dull, they're wonkish, and so they don't attract as much attention as you'd like. On the other hand, let me tell you something that I've been surprised about is how how courageous a lot of members of Congress have been on some of the big, tough issues that we've worked on over the last 20 months. I mean, I know it's fashionable to get down on Congress. Congress is right now very unpopular, both parties, because people just see the arguments all the time and the noise, and then they're absorbing all those negative ads, and they just feel like, gosh, these folks, they don't care about us. And I get that, but there are a lot of folks who took some really tough votes over the course of the last 20 months, knowing that it was bad for them politically, who voted for health care reform even though the polls said this would cause them problems in the next election, who voted for financial regulatory reform even though they knew that by supporting it, it might attract big money pouring in and directing negative ads against them. And they did it anyway. That was risky for them. And so part of the reason why I think this election is so important is I want to make sure that when somebody does the right thing, they get rewarded. I mean, I'm a strong believer in accountability in politics. And when somebody does the wrong thing, including somebody in my own party, I think they should be held to account. But I also think that there have been a surprising number of folks who've been willing to stand up. There's a candidate in Virginia, Tom Perriello, who's a great guy, who has worked. He comes from his is not a traditionally Democratic district, but he's just done what's right. And there have been times where he disagreed with me and he criticized me, but he always did so from a place of principle. John Boccieri in Ohio, Betsy Markey in Colorado. I mean, there have just been some folks who really stood up, knowing that they might be putting their congressional careers at risk, and that's been a pleasant surprise. So, all right, next. Let's see. I'm going to go boy, girl, so that I don't. Here, go ahead. We've got a microphone for you.
Hi, my name is Francesca. I live in D.C., but I'm originally from Dallas, Texas.
Great to see you, Francesca.
Mr. President, you have pointed out that a U.S. student